All right, well, good morning. Merry Christmas. I hope your Christmas wasn't too much of a mess, that you had a great time, family and that sort of thing. If it was a mess at all, if this year and this Christmas season made it a little bit more messy for you, then I'm not going to help today. So sorry about that. Actually, what I want to do today is put the mess back into Christmas or Christmas, or you get the point. What I actually want to do today is to contrast two things. I want to contrast the messiness of the story of Jesus coming into this earth and how that actually happened with the ultimate glory, with the glory of God. Jesus' story, however, does not start in Bethlehem, and it doesn't start 2,000 years ago like you might think. I love all the Gospels are unique in some really cool ways, and the Gospel of John starts with a really awesome description of the Christmas story. But what John doesn't do is he doesn't describe like the particulars of like it was in this place and Mary and Joseph and that sort of thing. John sort of I guess kind of like pulls back the veil and lets us into behind-the-scenes picture of what's going on. Or you might say that he kind of gives like this poetic imagery to describe what happens at Christmas. Here's how John chapter 1 starts. He says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made." I feel like it's beautiful, it's kind of like artistic and poetic. John's words are describing the Logos, and the Logos would be the Greek word for Jesus. It's describing Jesus. And what's interesting about that is that I don't know about you, but for me personally, when I picture creation happening, when I have a visual in my head of Genesis chapter 1, of the 7 days of God created the heaven, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and and so on and so forth through that entire chapter. What I usually don't picture is Jesus being there. What I usually don't picture is Jesus being there. And I think it's so awesome that John, if you didn't catch it yet, it starts in the beginning. You recognize that from anywhere? Right, like so Genesis 1 and John 1, they both start in the beginning. And John is saying, wait, we need to reframe that because Jesus was there then. All things were made through him, and so Jesus was at creation. Now, I believe this really, really matters when it comes to Christmas, and here's why. If we have to start with Jesus way back before 2,000 years ago and before Bethlehem and before the barn and all this business. I think sometimes we have a narrative or a way we describe Jesus at Christmas that looks something like this. Jesus is the best present we could get for Christmas. Jesus is better than my new socks. He's better than my new pajamas or my new iPhone 17 or my new guitar or whatever it is that you got for Christmas that you're really, really, really psyched about. A lot of times we describe Jesus as something like he's the best gift. The problem with that, though, is that underneath it kind of sounds something like Jesus only shows up on the scene when he's born as a baby in Bethlehem. And if we get that wrong, I think theologically we might say something like, God is triune, He's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and so there's three beings, they've always existed. But functionally, like actually how we think about Jesus tends to put him more in the person category than what, he's fully God and fully man, but we might focus too much on the person because we don't see that he has existed eternally forever before he even becomes flesh. Instead, I would say that the way to think about Christmas might look more like how does an infinity get squished down into our finite world? Like, how does that actually transpire? How does that happen? Or another way would be to say something like, if you had perfect wisdom, perfect glory, perfect honor, how do we take those kind of concepts and put skin and flesh and bones on that? Like, how does that work? Now, if y'all know me, you know that in my brain, I always have like pictures of things. That's helps me to like try to think through what they are. And so when I try to picture the incarnation, you might remember when I think of infinity, I think of toasters, if anybody recalls way back then. When I picture the incarnation, I'm visualizing something like a funnel that doesn't work. Something like a funnel that's supposed to take a bunch of stuff and kind of pour it down into something smaller. But actually, it doesn't, like, how do you put infinity into something that's finite? Like, it doesn't really work that way. That's kind of the image that comes to my mind. So where and when does this transpire, right? Well, when we talked about on Christmas Eve, that it was during the rule of Caesar Augustus and this kind of contrast of these two kingdoms, of Caesar's kingdom and of the kingdom of this baby King Jesus. Where does Jesus show up? Where does he come? He comes into a barn, or a lot of folks think it was actually more likely a cave, right? It's like they wouldn't even use the lumber to build a place for these animals. They'd just find some random cave, and that's where they kept animals. And so Jesus is born in this kind of rural town of Bethlehem, in this cave with all the sounds and sights and smells of a barn that he was born into. The lullaby effect. The lullaby effect, I believe, is very strong at Christmas. Now, here's what I mean when I say lullaby effect. What I mean is we've heard the stories so many times that we get kind of lullabied into kind of saying, I know how this is going to go. I know how this is going to work. We've heard those things, and so we actually miss the core power of the story based on its over-familiarity. So what I did is I spent a bunch of times, I try to write my sermons out a few weeks in advance. I spent a bunch of time a couple weeks ago trying to think of how I could make the power of the incarnation of this like funnel kind of situation memorable and fresh for y'all today. Fresh is not going to be the exact right word for this situation. What I did is a lot of y'all during this Christmas season have gotten me and my family presents. So I feel like I've eaten more cookies this week than I generally eat throughout a year. We got a lot of cards. A lot of kindness was shown to us in gifts to us as the pastor's family here. So I thought I would return the favor, and I have a present here for y'all. And so I'm going to open this up. Here's my present. You probably can't see in there. I'm not going to risk tipping it over, and you'll see why in just a second. I'll explain the situation. I've heard that out of the 5 human senses, the one that brings the most memory, that helps us to recall situations the best, is the sense of smell. In other words, if you smell something some point in time in your life, and then years later, you're hit with that same smell. You say, wow, I recognize that. I remember back to when that originally happened, more so than hearing something or that sort of thing. And so I'm relatively comfortable with the fact that the words that I say today will be forgotten pretty soon. And the sights and all that kind of stuff. But I want to focus on the sense of smell this morning. And so what I did is yesterday afternoon, actually earlier this week, I called my farmer neighbor, Donnie, who I thought could help me with this situation. And I called him up and said, do you care if I come over? I need to get a bucket of manure. And Donnie said, you can laugh, it's fine. And Donnie said, yes, I don't know why you need that. And I said, well, I'm using it for church. And he said, okay, well, I would recommend don't get the runny, liquidy kind of stuff. That will smell worse. And I said, well, actually, that's exactly what I'm going for. And so Donnie said to me, whatever you want to get, just come over and get what. So yesterday afternoon, I took this bucket. It didn't have the design on the outside. I took this bucket over to the farm with a shovel. And of course, if you're a thinking person like I was not, you realize that everything was frozen. So I had a dilemma on my hands. So I found not the runny stuff because it was all frozen solid like ice. I found some manure from the basement of his barn. And then much to my wife's disappointment, I spent the night last night thawing it by the wood stove in our house. And so probably what's going to happen here is that I'm the only person that's going to smell this, but I think you'll still just generally get the point of what's going on here. And I better have a good point, right? Because like, why on earth would a pastor have a bucket of manure in church? Yeah, I get that. In fact, I think some people might be processing something like, this seems a little on the disrespectful side. Like, we're here in church, we're here to worship Jesus, and why would you bring in a smell that nobody wants to deal with into that kind of setting? And I think if you're thinking those kinds of things, you're getting exactly the point of Christmas. If you're thinking those kinds of things, you're getting exactly the point of Christmas. When we strip Christmas down, when we remove kind of our cultural practices, and when we remove sort of our family routines, and as COVID has caused a lot this year to kind of remove some of those things from us, what we get at the very bare bones, like fundamental nature of Christmas is this infinite and glorious God who kind of empties himself so he can fit down through the funnel and comes into our manure-smelling world. Again, John, later on in John chapter 1, says that the Word, or the Logos, became flesh and dwelt among us. In other words, Jesus came and was purposely in our midst. He wanted to be in our midst. Now, I think that generally as human beings, what we prefer to do is something like this. Let's make ourselves presentable. Let's put on our sweater and our collared shirt, make ourselves presentable, and then we'll have somebody come and we'll interact with them relationally. That's what we prefer. And so I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but let's just say, for example, you have a house, and in that house you have a bathroom, and let's just say you haven't cleaned that bathroom for 2, maybe 3 weeks. And someone calls you up and says, I'd like to offer you some help, and I'd like to come over and clean your house for you, bathroom and all. I don't know if that's ever happened to any of you. In real life, that actually happened to Ing and I. Somebody called us this past year and said, hey, I'd like to help you. I'd like to come over and help clean at your house. And honestly, folks, it took all that we had to say yes. Like, everything was screaming. Like, I would prefer to say no to this situation. Like, I'll take care of my own mess. Thank you very much. I don't want you to see our bathroom. But God doesn't work that way. God doesn't work that way. What he says is, I am willing and want to come into your mess, sort of more along the lines of, will you let me? Jesus was born into our human mess in a kind of a dingy cave or animal-smelling barn. And you might be thinking, well, Pastor Luke, you're making a little bit too big of a deal about just the smell of that one time when Jesus came into this world. But I would argue, if you look at the rest of his life, if you look at the rest of Jesus' life from his birth onward, what you find is someone who's regularly going to go into and be willing to reach out into the mess of real people's real lives. I comprised a list that might be helpful. Here are some of the kinds of folks that Jesus purposely was willing to relate to because he was okay to go into people's messy lives. The woman caught in adultery, prostitutes, tax collectors, people with leprosy, woman with the issue of blood, half-breed Samaritan. He ran toward, not away from messy folks. The simple truth is that Jesus is worth all this infinite glory. He has to empty himself to come into the funnel, and where he comes into is our messy, manure-smelling space. In Philippians, Paul says that though he, that's Jesus, was in the form of God, though Jesus was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of the servant, being in the likeness of men. See, what I said at the beginning is I wanted to describe the big space between the glory of God and how he comes into this mess. Because if you have a small space between those two things, then Jesus coming doesn't really make a big deal, right? Like, if we're not all that bad and Jesus isn't eternally infinite, then there's not Christmas isn't as big of a deal as it maybe ought to be. But I would say that if there's a ton of space, if there's like infinite space between those two things, if our world does really smell like manure, and if God is really infinitely glorious, then the crazy amount of space between those two things means that the only reason he comes into this space is because he loves us. The only reason he crosses that giant divide is because he loves us. He wants our good. I'm guessing that most of us here today or listening are familiar with the most common verse in the Bible, right? That we talk about is John 3:16. And what does John 3:16 say? It says, "For God so loved the world that he sent his son." Okay, so God so loved the world that he sent his sons. But I think what we can do is we can kind of like, again, lullaby. We've heard that a million times, and it's just this theoretical sense of love. Like we might love our dinner, or we might love, something that's not like a real big deal. Let me see if I can get the same thing this way. It's not hard to send somebody into a nice space. It's not hard to send somebody in a nice space. And so if I said, for example, hey, Nick, I happen to have access to a really beautiful log cabin. It's up on the mountains. It's got lots of property. All expenses paid. I'd like for you and your family to just go and live there. The whole thing's all bought. It's paid for. It's done. You're allowed to go and enter that space. I don't think Nick would actually even have to like me in order to agree to go to do that thing. As long as it wasn't a trick, as long as I wasn't, messing with him, if that's a real deal, then you don't even necessarily have to like the person. You're going to go to that place. Like, sounds good, great. Now, on the other hand, if, which is not the case, Nick, so just calm down over there. If I have a septic tank issue at my house, and all of a sudden, I call Nick up on Monday and say, hey, I got the septic tank issue. I think we got to go down in there. It's going to be a messy job. We got to pump that thing out. We got to go down. There's maybe some repairs we need to make, something like that. Can you come over, tomorrow and take a day off work and come over and help me with the septic tank job? I feel like you at least have to like there has to be some goodwill meant towards those people if you're going to sign up for that job. And that's the point that I'm trying to get today. Jesus came into this mess. Like Christmas is Jesus coming into this mess, into our smelly world because he loves us. Do you know that? I'm going to just pause here for a second. Just think about that. He's here to clean your bathroom. Will you let him? Now, here's a thought that I've been processing for about the last 2 months. I heard this on a podcast originally that I listened to, and it asked this question. What is the fundamental nature underneath everything else of you as a person? Like fundamentally, wipe away everything up top, and underneath everything else, like what is the fundamental nature of each of you and of me as people? And now I know you're thinking, like, this guy has gone absolutely crazy. Like, first he brings manure in here, and now it's Christmas week, and we're supposed to be, like, brains turned off and just relaxing and enjoying ourselves, but now he's asking me, like, this super deep philosophical question, what is the fundamental nature of people? And you are right, I am crazy, I'll admit that, but the question really matters, I think. Why is this an important question to ask fundamentally who we are? Well, I would say I think there's 3 possible answers. I think there's 3 possible responses to fundamentally, at the very core, who are you? Answer number 1 is that fundamentally, you're a good person. Right? Fundamentally, I'm good. I care about other people. I want good things for other people, that sort of thing. Now, obviously, that goes against what I've been saying about the whole manure thing here today, but I believe that anybody who lives to a reasonably old age can see that there are some kinds of issues in your life, and oftentimes part of the cause of those is yourself. It's also interesting to note that Jesus himself This is exactly the group of people that he had the most trouble with, right? Like he was out into the minority of those people's lives who were willing to admit it, but the people who said they were good, those are the ones that he kind of had the biggest beef with. Okay, so I don't think that that's a viable option. Option 2, you might believe that fundamentally, underneath everything else, you're a sinner. And now I'm guessing some of you are perking up and saying, this sounds like a Christian answer. I better sign up for this one. This sounds like what we would say as we sit here in church, that underneath everything else, that we're a sinner. Well, the issue with that option is that if fundamentally, no matter what else, you're a sinner, then there's nothing you can do about that because that's your fundamental, underneath everything else, that is who you are, and that you're always going to be that way, and so why would we change? And there's a lot of people that literally go through life thinking this way, like, I'm a mess, and I can't change that, so I might as well just keep on being a mess. So I don't think that's a good option either. Now, here's the option that I think it is, which is option 3. And to understand this option, what we have to understand is that in the beginning, Genesis 1 and 2 came before Genesis 3. Let me explain what I mean. In Genesis 1 and 2, God created people, created everything, and said it was very good. And oftentimes we don't sit on that very long before we get to we're sinners. And so we miss out that fundamentally underneath everything else, God created humans, you and I, Adam and Eve, everybody, to be in good relationship with him and with each other. That at the very core of who we are is to be the image bearers of God. That's fundamental. That's underneath everything else. Well, that is good news, and here's why. Because the manure smell is only on the top. The manure smell is not the core of who we are as people. It's just covering that core. And if that's the case, then something can be done about it. Well, how does that work? Romans 5:8 tells us that God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Let me paraphrase that in my own way today, right? While we still smelled terrible, he died for us. You see, the incarnation is just the beginning of God, of Jesus emptying himself and coming down into our mess. It's just the beginning. It's not the whole thing. It's just the start of the thing. Because 33 years after he starts that, Jesus is going to go to the cross. And when Jesus goes to the cross, he's going to be ultimately separated from the Father. And the reason of that separation is not because of anything he did. He has no manure smell on him whatsoever. But instead, what Jesus is going to do is he is going to absorb our stink. He is going to absorb our stench into himself. And that's going to cause this separation, kind of this ultimate separation between him and the Father. He's going to absorb it into himself. He's going to die. And it looks pretty bleak. 3 days later, Jesus is going to raise again. And he defeated this sense that smell is a permanent situation. That's at our core. He defeated that, and let me paraphrase. Here's a hymn that you guys probably all know. What can wash away our sin? What can wash away our stench? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. And so in this beautiful way, Jesus, who doesn't smell at all, his blood is able to, it's like the miracle cleaner. It's able to clean away this manure smell out of away from our lives and allow us to live fully who we have always been meant to live at the core of a fundamental part of our being. Let me summarize all that I just said before I make one final point. Christmas doesn't start in Bethlehem. It started infinitely long ago when Jesus was always part of the Trinity. He was there at creation. And at Christmas in Bethlehem, what he does is he empties himself and comes down into our manure-smelling world. And he does that not because it's a cool thing to do or whatever, or because he has to. He does that because he loves us. And he loves us so much that that's just the beginning, because eventually he absorbs our stench into himself and dies freeing us to live in that Genesis 1 and 2 right relationship with God and with others and that sort of thing. Now, I feel like if you're not a believer, this is what I'm describing as what it looks like for us to believe in Jesus, is to acknowledge that he did that for us. But if you have been worshiping or living with Jesus for a while, maybe that picture can be helpful for you, but there's also another thing to say about this. Because if you are connected relationally with God through Jesus, that means you also have the Holy Spirit in you. And if you have the Holy Spirit in you, that means that where you go and what you do, you kind of can bring or kind of push forward the mission that God wants to happen in this world, wherever and however you're living your life. Not because you're anything special, but because God's doing it through you. And so just like Jesus came down into this mess because he loved us, we are empowered to go out into other people's messes. And a lot of times I think we set up our situation to say something like, we are the good church people, and those other people out there are the messy people that, they're going to be in big trouble, and this kind of thing, and we have the sense that they're like too messy for us to maybe get involved with, right? Because it gets complex, It's like, well, what if I know that they're doing some sinful thing? How am I... Jesus knew we were a manure-smelling mess and came down into this world. And so I think to live out what it looks like to be Christ-like in this world means to be willing and excited to go into the mess of other people around us. To say no one is so far away from God's grace that we can't reach out and care about and love and want their good. And I get that it gets complex. It's not a simple thing. I'm not saying it's all easy answers once you decide to do that. I'm just saying decide to do that. That's all I'm saying. I think that the further we get that gap of how far between our messy world and God's glory, the bigger we see God's love is. And the bigger we see that God's love is, the more easily it will overflow and we'll be encouraged to go out into the mess of those around us. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are a good God who loves your people, that you did not sit back and stay aloof and let us struggle in our sinfulness and our frailty and our misery and our stench, but that you sent Jesus into our world, into our mess, because you love us. I thank you that you so loved the world that you sent your Son. I thank you that he died to remove our stench, and pray that we would live lives that would be enthusiastically overflowing with your love for others, and be encouraged to go into the mess of people around us for not our own glory, but for your glory. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.